Hi everyone, welcome today to the professor panel. It's an honor to have you all here today. Today we have 5 professors here to answer a few questions about getting involved in research in their fields, and presumably at the end if you guys have any questions, to answer any questions of your own. So to kind of start off, I guess we'll get started.
So the agenda for the meeting would just be, we'll be doing some introductions for all our panelists, and then we'll have some prepared questions on the slides following. And then after that, we'll have a Q&A. We'll open it up for a Q&A.
All right, so real quick, first, this is more of an open event for people that are also outside of the Peer Mentorship Program as well as in it, but for people who are unfamiliar with the Peer Mentorship Program, we run every semester. The mentees are paired with an upperclassman mentor who's already doing research, so they kind of help them, more of like a leadership role to help guide them and direct them through how to get involved in research. We help you break into research, basically, and yeah, we have the link there for anyone who might be interested, but most of you guys look like familiar faces, so I think you guys are familiar with the Peer Mentorship Program, which is part of the broader Cornell Undergraduate Research Board.
We'll just start with introductions. So I just get started with this side now.
Okay. I'm Greg Fuchs from Applied and Engineering Physics.
I'm Nate Foster from Computer Science. Hi everyone. I'm JJ from Mechanical and Aerospace.
Dave Linguistics from Nutrition and Psychology.
Hi, I'm Melina Mauricio. I'm from Linguistics.
Yeah, and then I think we can get started out just run through one time. Actually, you can start.
Yeah, so I don't know to what extent any of you are familiar with what linguistics is. It's a relatively new branch of knowledge, science, where we are basically interested in understanding what makes what the makeup of human languages, basically, what makes them different from other forms of communication, like animal communication, or other types of objects in the world that are called languages, like coding languages. In particular, I work on the area of meaning, so I'm interested in understanding how we humans assign interpretations to sentences or utterances, right? Why it is that you can understand stuff of what's coming out of my mouth, basically. And in my research, I basically investigate this question from the point of view of understanding the division of labor between what's like hard-coded in your mind brain as part of the grammar, right? And what's basically what kind of meaning is part of online inferences that happen during conversation. So I direct a lab, the Linguistic Meaning Lab, or the Line Lab. And if you are interested in knowing more about the work that we do, you're welcome to reach out to me. Just look me up on the Linguistics website, and I'll be happy to talk to many of you. Yeah.
Hi, I'm David Levinsky, in case you forgot 5 minutes ago. I'm in nutritional sciences. Nutrition is a wonderful science for understanding the body. It's a great pre-med group. I think most of our majors are pre-meds because nutrition teaches you not just what nutrients you should eat, but why the suggestions that we make work. What causes the disease and what you eat affects how that works. And I want to speak larger than my own research group because there are everyone, all the faculty in nutrition are doing research. And the only thing they need is a question to get them going. They, like I, love our undergraduate researchers. We love them because they're hard workers, they're smart, they know that if they do a good job, that they're a good recommendation, medical school, wherever they're gonna go. And they just make for a wonderful set of students to work with. My area, my specific area is energy balance, body weight. What determines your body weight, and even better, what can you do about it? It turns out that we continue to grow after adolescence, as many of you freshmen have probably noticed, is that you continually gain weight into your about middle age. That weight gain is very curious because it's very small and you don't even know why you're gaining weight. And there's only two parts of that equation is intake and expenditure. There's good reason to believe it's not energy expenditure, so we're overeating. You start getting into the question of, well, why do you overeat? You get into a whole set of intricate social, economic issues. All the pressures out there by the food manufacturers to get you to eat a little bit more than you expend. And the result, of course, is an increase in weight. And of course, what do you do about it is the important question. And that's one reason, although my training was in psychology, just like in this building, you really have to understand the mechanisms that underlie it to really appreciate it. One of the aspects that we've been working on, at least I've been working on it for at least 20 years, with the help of undergraduates. By the way research goes in my lab, very similar to the way it's done in other offices in nutrition, other departments. But if you want to say you want to work in my lab, I'll have a quick interview just to find out if you're interested. And what I'm looking for is your interest in that subject, which means not just cleaning the test tubes, but it means digging into the question, coming up with alternative solutions, alternative methods. I would like to see you involved in any question that you take up, any part of the question. That's what I'm looking for. That's what I'm going to be writing about when I write your letter of recommendation, is your involvement. To do research, you've got to be totally dedicated. I don't think anybody in their right mind would do research if they're just doing it for the money, for example, or for anything else. You got to love it. And there's a lot of love in doing research. So I would strongly recommend anybody who has an interest in doing research, just go up to any professor, practically in any field, and I would suggest you do a little homework. You explore what they're working on, and everybody's research is on the web. And then if you go in telling them about, oh, you know that paper you wrote in 2020, I thought that was really good. It showed this and that. You got that job, okay? Because every one of us has a bigger ego that fits in our heads. And you tell them something about their research, they'll pick you up immediately. And I would strongly recommend that you get involved and work through a problem, your own problem you work on, an honors thesis, which is a good way of making your thesis public, or just working with that professor. That's the best way of learning. It's the oldest way of learning, just working with someone in that field.
Hi everyone, again, I'm JJ, just in case, and I'm from mechanical and aerospace engineering. So basically my lab, I kind of called it the lab for engineering living materials. So basically what we do is more towards computational simulations, where we are actually trying to use something called multi-scale simulations to determine the material properties of different kinds of biopolymers, as well as of living organisms, let's say when they form a particular colony. And we try to use that as an engineering material, where let's say if there's a sudden change in the environment, like a change in temperature or a change in temperature, the corresponding properties of the material will change as well. And we do a lot of coding, we have a lot of applications, especially in terms of using tools like machine learning and things like that, which we try to integrate into our lab's research as well. So maybe another thing to add on to what David was saying previously as well, not just to the professors, but I also felt that having the undergrads interact with all the team in the lab, including the PhD students, the master students, they can teach you a little bit about every single stage of the whole research process, and also to get to their perspective and their experience, being in the trenches, so as to speak. Yeah, so that's what I would like to add.
So I don't really have a lab per se. I would kind of run my group a little bit more like I think a lot of mathematicians do. So I have my group works on in computer systems very broadly, but really combining ideas from two areas. So my training and my background is in the field of programming languages, so the coding languages that were mentioned earlier. And the kind of questions that we look at there are, designing new languages that have maybe some nice design around that and nice properties, formalizing them mathematically, so giving a really precise description of what every program in that language means, and then building efficient implementations by compiling them down to lower level chip languages or other languages. So that's sort of one set of ideas. And then the second set of ideas, I'll be happy to talk about this more later. I kind of took a left turn during my postdoc and started working on computer networks, which have not really been programmable for sort of the first 30 years of the internet, or at least not by civilians, but they've been opening up. And so people are designing new languages and new abstractions and new systems for computer networks. And so my group's looking at what would good languages for networks be, how would we show that they're secure, how would we make them fast, and so really the intersection of those two fields is where my group works. Like everyone said, I've been around for 12 years, and I've worked with lots of undergrads, I've written papers with undergrads. Actually, I think the two papers I'm proudest of from the last 12 years were both on undergrads as the first authors, and that was an exceptional experience both for the ideas and for the kind of mentoring and camaraderie of having a team like that. And how to talk more to you now about strategies and ways to get involved.
Thank you. So I'm Greg Fuchs once again. I'm in applied engineering physics. The simple thing to understand about what we do, and this I think is department-wide, is we apply physics. A lot of the times that means we do physics. We try to elucidate new physical principles. And often we do it with a target in mind, so we try to do something for something. We like it when it's useful. So in my group specifically, I have kind of two main areas, which is unusual, and they have some overlap. So the first area is, my background is in condensed matter physics, which is physical things, stuff, and we work in the area of magnetism and magnetic materials. We do some rather unusual microscopy of magnetic materials. In the other side of my group, we work on quantum information systems. So that is just what it sounds. We make qubits, study and measure them, and try to understand what interesting things and new things you can do with them. That extends to some applications like making quantum networks, sensing using qubits, and other things. What we don't do is we don't compute. So there are other people that compute. My group doesn't really work on that. And so also, just to echo some of the things that have been said that are good, there's been a lot of undergrads that have come through my group, a number of senior theses. I actually earlier, this afternoon, I spoke to a student to help her figure out how to write her senior thesis. And so, okay, here's the last 4 that people wrote. A good trajectory that I see I'm sure this will come up with other questions, but a good trajectory that I see is when students join the group and make a strong commitment to doing the research. And oftentimes that means, starting even as a sophomore is a sort of good timing, because it takes a really long time to learn how to contribute in a sort of original and meaningful way. There's a lot of things to learn. So I think that's good.
So, well, thank you so much. You guys all gave really good answers. You can just put the mic there.
Yeah.
So now we're going to enter the questions, the panel questions. Right. And for this, we don't need to go in any specified order. If inspiration strikes you, you can just reach for the microphone. And yeah, so let's move on. So the first question we have is, what are ways people can conduct research in your respective fields? So what are different ways, different styles? Is there a set way of research, or is it just what are the different ways?
I'll start it off because I think there's an operational answer. When people start, the answer is different than when they kind of finish if they're a longitudinal student. So some of the students have been in my group for 2 or 3 or 4 years. And by the time they leave, if they're sort of a longitudinal student, they might be doing things similar to the graduate students and postdocs in many ways. But when they start, they're not prepared to do that. And so very often what happens is when people start, they do something on a computer. Because I know they can't break a computer. That's really important because I actually do have a lab and stuff breaks. So that is an opportunity to see if a student can take a project and think about it, not just mechanically do something, but really, and I heard that earlier, really get involved, dig into the questions that are there, and sort of, how far can they push, think out of the box, so on and so forth, because research is very different than a class. And so, once I get some confidence in that student, then kind of more advanced things can start to think of.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything you want to add about that? Any unique ways you've seen people do research in your fields?
I just want to say that the particular problem you're working on is not as important as how you go about solving that problem. That's what, as a research mentor, I'm actually looking at. How well does this person understand the problem and figure out ways to solve that problem? Because when they write that letter of recommendation, which is what everybody is waiting for, they're the things that go in the letter of recommendation that mean a lot. And it involves a total commitment to that question. The particular question that you work on is mostly irrelevant. It is how you go about solving that problem that stands out, or the characteristics that will be picked up and forwarded in letters of recommendation.
I wanted to add a little bit of color, and I'll do this through my own experience. So I did not start research as a sophomore. My parents are not professors. I did not really know what research was. I was studying abroad as a junior, and I got this email saying, hey, I'm looking for a research assistant for the summer. And I thought, yeah, grad school, maybe that's something I want to do. Let me try this out. And at the time, this was like the first .com boom. So I worked the previous summer making oodles of money in Boston, running websites, and I was like, do I really want to go take this job on campus doing research? And I did it on a whim, sort of. My advisor was very persistent and a very dedicated mentor. It was not a plan that I had, from the beginning. I think the one thing that I did that I think was useful was to be very engaged. Like I jumped into it. I didn't kind of dip my toe in. I really went at it. I figured if I was going to try this for a summer, I should really do it. And I think that over a short period of time, I was able to then write a thesis. We actually wrote the thing up as a paper. It was quite intense. And although I didn't know everything at the beginning, in fact, I had very little of the background to do research. That intensity and having a dedicated mentor could help me fill in the pieces that I didn't have was super important. So I mentioned this just because, I don't know if people are first years or seniors, but I think it's never really too late, although, you know, by the time you're a senior, it might be, the time is slipping away. There's many paths, and I think, you know, being involved with a research project is a wonderful part of an education. And I think, you know, you go through Cornell having only taken classes, you can have a great experience, but if you do research in some way, even if you end up, you know, not going to grad school, not becoming a researcher, it is a different way of thinking, and it's a thing to experience.
Awesome, thank you so much. And then if anyone else has anything to add?
I kind of like something, so, for me, like, is this working now? Can you hear me? Okay. It's good, it worked. So when I decide to start working with a student is because I get the impression that, of course, they are very motivated, right? And for me, the two things that I'm looking for usually is, first of all, is this person going to be dependable, right? Are they going to deliver on their to-dos? Are they going to show up? Are they going to be committed, right? But the other thing I'm also looking for is how independent and creative they are, right? So how much initiative are they willing to take? Are they willing to go a step farther from what I strictly assigned to them at the beginning when they are still learning how research works? So I would say if you can manage to convey that delicate balance between being dependable and at the same time being very proactive, that's something that I personally value, but I think anybody running a lab or a research group will probably value as well.
Thank you.
What is the best way to reach out to the faculty about research? Yeah, this question, when should I look to get involved in research, and is there a right time?
So to kind of build up on what you're talking about.
So yeah, I think several of us have already kind of alluded to the fact that there's no such thing as a good time, like the best time is right now. Yeah, but definitely I think being able to start early is good, and also being able to persist is good as well. So definitely if you are able to start early and hopefully, you know, you find a good match with your own research interests, with your own academic interests, and with your own career goals as well, right? I think it's definitely good to start talking to the professors, and also even to, you know, look at what are your own career goals and how that research might be able to help you in your career goal as well.
Yeah, I'll just jump in with I guess, you know, a lot of us get a lot of emails from students looking through research, and so, you know, I think finding some strategies for finding sort of the right way to make the first ask or the point of contact is helpful, especially in fields, like my field has, you know, hundreds of undergrads, so I get a lot of these emails, and I politely answer all of them, but, you know, there's certain ways that you can sort of make the initial contact that are more effective. So I think having taken someone's class is a great way, even if it's an intro class, you know, you'll get a sense of their style and the kind of things that get them excited. So that's a great time to make contact. And it may be that is still too early. Like if you're taking a class that's the first, you know, 1,000 level or 2,000 level, I know in my area, I encourage people to take a 3,000 level class because it has kind of exactly the right set of skills to join my group and to start contributing. But I'm very happy to teach an earlier class to have people come talk to me. I guess the other thing is, you know, of course, in some respects, it's a cold call. Like when you just send an email to someone, and I don't want to discourage anyone from cold calls. You should be knocking on doors, sending emails, investing a little bit in you know, tailoring the note to them and their research. I think, you know, I'll just some ways that are not effective. I sometimes get emails kind of, you know, in May saying, hey, I haven't gotten a job yet. I'm thinking of finding a research job. You mentioned ego, like that makes me sound like I'm the backup choice or something. Research is the backup choice. Or I often get emails from people who clearly haven't even looked at my area. Like, you know, I work on blockchain and machine learning. Like, I do neither of those things. So I think, you know, putting a little bit of effort into showing a genuine interest goes a really long way. Even just getting the area right, you know, some topic, even if it's something I worked on 10 years ago and I'm doing at this time, you know, if someone has taken the time to look at a paper or my website and have something to say, that's great. There are also a couple of structured ways that I think some of this may be department specific, but at least in CS, there's a thing called Research Night, there's a CSERT program. These are great ways, they're kind of institutional programs that try to give you an on-ramp to make introductions. So those are kind of high probability ways to get matched up with someone and to join a group.
So one thought is that, yeah, you certainly want to distinguish yourself, and all these things that have been said are true. I also want to just quickly point out that, like, sometimes you're going to get no, and it's nothing to do with you at all. So, you know, in order, for instance, for me to say yes to a student, not only do I have to be impressed in some way by that student, but also I have to, in my mind, know, okay, what sort of project would I want to put them on? Like, do I have something that's timely and important, but not too important because I want to make sure that if it falls apart, it doesn't make something else fall apart. And is there a person that's like has bandwidth in the group that they can interface on a more regular basis than me? And those are a lot of conditions to be met. So, you know, but they're all important things because I've known from experience that if even one of those things isn't met, then it can be a bad experience for the student, or it just can be unproductive. And so most of the time you're going to get no. And I guess the answer that the thing that I would let people know is that most research is interesting. You know, I have rarely met a research question that I wasn't interested in. And so, you know, there isn't just one group that you have to work for. There's lots of good things happening, and, you know, be open and just keep trying. The persistence is probably the number one thing.
Is there anything else to add? Oh, yeah, we can move on to the next question.
Yeah, so some of you have already answered this in part, but if anyone has anything to add, what is the best way to reach out to faculty about research?
I know we talked a lot about that.
You guys are great answers. So I understand if there's nothing else really add about that.
I guess has any of you experienced like a student on asking during office hours for research and things like that? Any suggestions about that?
Yeah, so just to quickly also talk about my own experience, you know, getting into research as well as an undergrad. So I kind of maybe started a little later. I did kind of like an internship in the third year because I graduated from Singapore. So we have like a compulsory internship in the third year of our undergrad study. So that's where I got into research itself because I was doing an internship with a national institute in Singapore. And so I got interested in doing all those sort of research and stuff like that. But subsequently, I also realized that this particular area of research was closely connected to one of my own instructors in material science and engineering, which I was really, and when I took his class, I was really inspired by him, and I was also found that he's a really good mentor as well. So I kind of approached him and told him, you know, I took your course before. I work in this area of research, which I think is a good fit for your area of research as well. And you know, and that's where we kind of started talking on possible research topics, and eventually became my PhD supervisor. So, and my own current experience is that by teaching some of these undergrad classes, you know, some of the undergrads also come up to me to say that we are interested, you know, after having, let's say, taken statics and mechanics of materials, we find that that's an extremely interesting topic, and we would like to work further, you know, and just by talking to them face to face during classes or during office hours, and that really helps to make that connection as well.
Awesome, thank you. You guys are giving us some really detailed answers. I really appreciate that. Seriously, thank you. So yeah, does anyone else have anything to add? If there's not, we'll move to the next question.
Okay, yeah, so should students be concerned about the pandemic in regards of their ability to get research?
everyone's suffering from the pandemic. So it just puts a little hurdle in front of us all. But that shouldn't stop you. That can slow things up, but don't let things coming here, we're talking too fast. But it's your desire that's gotta come through to do research. And that'll come through a mask, that'll come through this pandemic. It is things that as professors we're looking for, and if you give it, you show it, we'll eat it up. Pandemic or not.
So I gather that probably of all the professors here, I'm the only one who does research that involves humans. So for us, the pandemic has affected a little bit of the workflow, because for some time the labs were closed, and so we couldn't bring people into the lab to participate in our experiments. But even though that's not happening anymore, so I guess the answer is we shouldn't worry too much about that unless the pandemic worsens again. But I think what you said is right. Even when our labs were closed, we found creative ways of working around that. So a lot of the research moved to remote platforms, right? So we would use crowdsourcing platforms to collect data remotely from people who were sitting in front of their computers or laptops at home, and things kept moving forward. We had to adapt, but you sort of always make it work. So I think the answer is yes, sure, you should be concerned, but you should not let it prevent you from achieving whatever your career goals with respect to research are.
Yeah, very well said, thank you. No, serious. Yeah. So what are some qualities that you look for in undergrads who are looking to join your lab or be involved in your research field in general?
This is like so easy.
Yeah.
Persistence, right? Also at the same level, independent thinking, like asking the question, oh, well, why am I doing this? Why is this important? And then eventually, if the student is really an independent thinker, I'll know, because within 6 months, there'll be disagreement, which is great. So that's what I would.
The other thing that I look for is enthusiasm. It shouldn't be a drudgery to do research. You should want to do it. It should have an appeal for you, and you've got to exhibit that. It shows. It shows when you are really intrigued by the problem and working hard on that problem. But and it expresses in other things like dependability is extremely important for research. But again, if you're highly motivated, you're really interested in the problem, that doesn't become a problem. But these are important characteristics that we look for.
So one that hasn't come up already, like everything that has been said is rewarding, and probably it's the one that I have in mind is related to persistence. I think that resilience is really important when you do research, because most of the things you try don't work. So you have to be okay with, things not working for the longest time until you finally come up with a solution or try something else that, all of a sudden finally works. So you have to really be okay, undergoing that process of nothing works until, one day something works. And that requires a lot of trial and error and a lot of persistence of keep trying things. Blindly, of course, with some guidance and of course making educated guesses. But if you're not okay with things not working, then research is not going, probably, in my experience, going to be your thing.
At the risk of jumping past the question, maybe I'll just describe a little bit of sort of the arc of how an undergraduate experience might go. I think this question is sort of prompting, like, how does the initial pairing happen? How do you kind of get, your foot in the door? And for that, like many of my colleagues here, like, I'll have an interview, some kind of discussion, try to find out why people want to do research, what are they motivated by, what's their long-term plan. And then there's no right or wrong answers here, but I'm trying to understand, are people thinking about the bigger questions. I do think somewhat explicitly about whether, I have a sort of finite number of slots for undergrads, and so I'm trying to use those slots to help people who can make the most of it, which doesn't just mean the highest GPA, it doesn't mean the people who are dead certain on grad school. It could be the person who's got okay grades, but is interested, seems to have a passion for an area and is still determining what they want to do. But I do try to get a sense of kind of where they are. After someone starts, there's a commitment on my part, and if I have a grad student involved or postdoc helping mentor, that's a commitment, right? We're offering to meet regularly to help provide guidance, but at least in my group, I don't provide a whole lot of, there's not a lot of pull, and I tell students this explicitly, that like, I'm not going to give you prelims or a final, like I'll want some deliverable at the end of the semester so I can give you a grade, but the thrust is going to, and the drive is going to have to come from me. And I think where, projects really succeed or not, we usually start with a fairly short, a well-defined kind of short problem. It won't be like a problem set, but it'll be a problem that's definitely achievable. I just haven't figured out exactly how to solve it yet. And people who throw themselves into that first project, and even if they don't solve it, if they, hit interesting dead ends or start asking interesting questions, that's a signal to the entire group that this is a live wire, this person's interesting, and they're going to do stuff. And that's, once the group has made that assessment, then you're kind of off to the races, because that first problem probably didn't actually matter. The beauty of research is you can always take turns and redefine the problem and go somewhere else. But the mode of inquiry and that experience in that first stage, which could be 2 weeks, it could be a month, it could be a semester, but whatever that first stage is, doing something interesting is really key.
Yeah, thank you. Is there anything else to add to that?
I agree with your point about doing something interesting. I worked on a farm, and that's how I got my first research experience. I think that's very fun. But you guys are making really good points for the quality. Yeah, I hope I have them.
So then, our last question here is, what are some mistakes that you see undergrads commit when looking to get involved in research?
Should have heard the question correctly. So definitely. So in terms of mistakes, I think the biggest one is so far what I've experienced so far, the biggest mistake is that the student come to me, they make the commitment, and then they just give up. And they thought that, they were really interested in the problem, and then suddenly they find that, when all the exams and all the projects, all the deadlines start piling in, and the first thing that they give up is their research. And that does turn into a bad experience, both for the students and the mentor themselves. So definitely I strongly encourage every undergrad who wants to do research, once you have settled into the lab, make the commitment, to see through it and get something out of it as well.
I'll just give 2 failures I see which are kind of contradictory. So one is, sometimes I see students who see that you need 3 letters to apply to a PhD or a graduate program. And so they'll go to 3 research experiences with different people, and they'll never have the time to actually do something interesting. So they'll end up with 3 letters that say this person did research, and if you read a reference letter, it will sound very positive, but nothing actually happened. And so they would have been much better off investing in one thing. And so I sometimes, I see students who are kind of seem to be flipping around between groups. I say, let's, if something's not going right in one group, sure, switch areas or switch mentors, but no need to kind of go around and spread yourself too thin. On the flip side, research is a human enterprise in any field, and the people you work with, make a big difference. And I truly believe that sometimes there's just like fit or lack of fit. And I think, anyone at Cornell is going to be, I hope, invested in your success and do everything they can to get you there. But sometimes it might be that your, interest or talents or whatever just aren't the right fit with the right group. And so, I think that, again, this is contradictory, but if you find yourself in a niche and early on, especially, you can discover, this isn't really what I want. That's an okay outcome of a research experience. Discovering that I don't want to do field X, I'm really passionate about field Y. So again, I don't encourage you to kind of jump around. I don't encourage you to give up. Persistence is number one word that's been said most frequently. And research is hard, so it's not going to be like a class that has well-defined problems and outcomes. You can solve the problems. But do think about using it as a process to discern your interests and refine them over time.
One minor thing to add to that, everything that was said is, I think, right on point. But one comment that I have is when people try too hard for a particular outcome, that can be kind of like the rock that you throw yourselves on. And so my advice is always to all my students and my postdocs and my undergrads and my grad students is to fail quickly. It's one of the most important lessons to learn in life, is that you figure out what you're going to do, you try it, you do a go, no go kind of a thing, whether it's an experiment or a simulation or a model or whatever you're doing. And if it doesn't work, you're trying to figure out if it can work. And if it can't work, say, hey, this can't work. Let's find another way to do something good. And you can. And so don't suffer quietly and just keep throwing yourself onto that stone because it's not going to be pleasant.
Well, yeah, that was all great advice. Any other last comments on this?
Well, it makes me feel better. I screwed up a lot when I was young. Thank you. So I guess it leaves us with any general advice you'd like to tell people, and if not, we'll just go directly to Q&A. But if you guys have any lingering thoughts that we didn't address during the main questions. Awesome. So for the people in the audience, if you guys have any questions, please, we welcome them. And yeah, just raise your hand, we can call on you. But yeah. Yes.
So obviously you're all professors, but what do you guys think about doing research in academia versus industry?
I guess I can kind of answer to that. So I did 2 years of research in the national lab, which is in collaboration with Procter & Gamble. So that's more towards industrial research versus the academic research that I did subsequently for another 2 years on postdoc. So that was a bit of a contrast. So in industrial research, my own experience is that the projects never last beyond 3 to 9 months. So it's extremely fast turnover. Whether for better or worse, you do not get to use the same amount of rigor as you would do in a really, really long 2 or 3 year academic project. So a lot of them, the projects are meant to come up with a product really rapidly. So you need to devise ways to think fast and come up with results fast. So that's a very big contrast from academic research where you can take a bit more time, you can be a lot more rigorous. And yeah, so that's the main difference.
I can answer this. So I spent my first sabbatical at a startup company that was later acquired by a big tech company, and I continued to work with them 1 day a week as an external consultant. And so I do research at a company, and I think everything you said is spot on. I'm given immense privileges with the company. Like they treat me like, we only get you for this 1 day a week. We want you to think about the big questions. Don't get too tied up with engineering. And still, everything in the company ultimately is about making a profit, building a product. And so that just shapes the way, the kinds of problems you're going to take on. You're going to work on things that are shorter term. You're going to work on things that are less risky. You don't have the freedom to always just redefine the problem halfway through. And so, it is, I enjoy it because it does have that kind of external evaluation. Like, is this thing actually going to work under a bunch of assumptions that were imposed by the market or by the rest of the industry? And it is, I also work with really smart people. I work with a bunch of other PhDs at the company. So it's it's working with a more senior level of people, and that's just a different kind of team, which has, well, it's just different. Working with students is a joy, of course, but the people are, at an earlier stage of their training. So I think, if you're asking kind of in terms of career trajectories, I would choose a professor 100 times out of 100. Like the freedom and the joy of working with students and watching people make that transition, and just, if I have a great idea, I can immediately, get my group working on it. It's very immediate, like there's an immediate gratification in that sense. And, I think companies or industrial research is interesting, because sometimes you can have an impact that is larger or different in some way. But there are lots of downsides that go along with it.
I think in my experience working consultant in industry and in academia is one of the big differences is the breadth of thought that's involved. In industry, I think you guys pointed out, you're trying to solve a little problem. In academia, primarily because of kids like you constantly asking questions, you start asking the larger questions, the more theoretical, the broader questions, which don't get asked when you're forced to come up with immediate solutions to immediate problems. And that's just a way of thinking about things. But there clearly is a big difference between industry and academia in that way.
Sorry, I'm hogging the mic, but I would say there is another track also, which is national labs or government service at various kinds, and that you can be a scientist or not just a scientist. You can be a PhD or someone with advanced training who goes and works with the government, helping them do things in national interest, or you can work there at different labs in the sciences, and that's it can have the same you have the same amount of sort of intellectual freedom and job stability and all of that. And so there are other paths beside universities if you end up pursuing a research career. Everyone in the industry or in a government lab will say, "Oh, I only get like one intern every summer," and that's and they resent that. They wish they had a lab with 15 students.
Yeah, when I was trying to decide between those two options for myself, the one that was really the deciding factor is that I wanted to have ownership over my research agenda and deciding which direction I wanted to go. I didn't want to have a project taken away from me because of whatever reason, the higher ups deciding that was no longer one of the goals of the company, right? In academia, you really get to shape your own research by asking your own questions. So I think that usually means you get to be a little bit more creative. And ultimately, I think if the questions you are interested in would fall under the umbrella of what we call basic science, then I think definitely academia is a much friendlier environment and better suited for that for the case that kind of research requires, and the kind of effort that you need in order to succeed.
Yeah, that was a really good question, man.
Yeah.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any? Yes.
How did you find your individual research fields? Are there any interesting stories of how you stumbled upon a research project?
So, in my case, I picked my research field a little bit. So I mentioned that I'm a convinced metaphysicist, and so what I wanted to point out is why I decided on that versus some other thing. And what it came down to for me, which is very sort of small thinking in a way, but I wanted to work in a field where I could come up with an idea in the morning and possibly even implement it, or at least have a plan to implement it, and then make that start to happen, in that same day. And that isn't something that is generally universal. So in different branches of physics, for example, there can be very, very large collaborations. High energy physics, you see these papers and they have, 200 authors, and it just doesn't turn on a dime. So for me, I wanted to do what I think of as small science. It doesn't mean that it's not important, but it just means that it's a small group of people. It happens on a table. There's no forklift involved. Actually, sometimes there is, but only once. Bring in the table. And so anyway, that made a difference. In other words, I thought about what is my life going to be like? How am I going to interact with other people? What are those relationships going to be like? And by keeping it in a smaller scale, for me, that was something I valued.
You guys love to speak up, or you've answered every question. Seems like mentors. So I'm someone who still doesn't know what I want to be when I grow up, and every twist and turn in my career path has been, taking a chance. Like I'll take some leap, and I'll have some wonderful mentor who helps guide me into a new area. So I worked a long time ago on, object-oriented programming languages with my undergrad mentor, and that was wonderful. I learned lots of things about the theory of languages and the whole way of doing math basically. But I loved that. And then during my PhD, I had a mentor in a different area, and kind of switched into more of an applied direction. And then I did a postdoc on a whim. I was actually deferred my start date at Cornell to do a postdoc, and got into a whole new area because I knew I was kind of bored with my PhD topic. My sabbatical also was another mentor. So I think you'll find that really the human aspect is not that I have my own ideas for what I want to do with research, but I'm a curious person, and I think you can also just kind of wander and find your way, that's really for me a kind of source of creativity. Getting bored, jumping into a new area where I know nothing, trying to have some ideas of my own, and rinse and repeat.
I would like to echo that point as well. Like the linear path in the career is probably kind of a myth. So I had the same experience as well. Like I was in aerospace engineering as an undergrad. I did some research in aerospace engineering, and then during my PhD, I switched over to studying graphene and thermal properties. And during my first job as a research scientist, I switched again to doing molecular dynamic simulations on cosmetics. So and in my next postdoc, I switched again to doing biological materials. So now I'm switching again to studying living organisms. So I think that one point that hasn't been raised up was about curiosity. Definitely if you are extremely curious, you are always asking, why is this so? Why is this correct? Why is this happening? If you can keep asking that why, and you are interested in probing that, then the research questions I find that just naturally just comes up. No matter what the topic is. And the other thing is that you probably would have to love to read a lot. So yeah, reading papers is probably fundamental to that as well.
Well, thank you. Great answers and a great question, man. So we're coming up on 7 o'clock a bit, so I think we have time for one last question, if anyone wants to ask it. All right, well, I see that as a negative, but you guys did a great job explaining. I don't know. I feel very inspired. I appreciate it.
Yeah, good. Great answers and very informative. And I think that concludes the panel.
Thanks for coming out today, everyone, and thank you. Seriously, you all, it's great.